Okay, so I am back today with all things Scorned Obsession, and I'm Original Book Nerd, and today we will be talking with Victoria Page on her all-new release, Scorned Obsession. Oh, Victoria, this is a darker romance with a twist because Bianca and Sandro are not a couple that always liked each other, but maybe the title fits, obsession, right? I did have one question to kick us off. Between the two, who do you think has the most obsession of the pair?
Well, so that's kind of hard to say. I think it was Bianca at first because this whole series is all about the obsession of, most of them is about the obsession of the Deluccis. It's like a curse, and a myth in their family that the Deluccis, when they get obsessed, they get really obsessed. So Bianca was really the one obsessed first. But Sandro was obsessed with Bianca without knowing that he was obsessed. He just thinks like, because it was childhood friends to enemies to lovers, it was more of he was treating her more like a little sister at first, and then it just changed and he became obsessed. And that's when all the my wife came about. So yeah.
So, on the topic of the my wife trope, that would be a trope I highly associate it with like the darker, almost like mafia type romances or the really alpha male sport romances like hockey.
Mhm.
As an author, would you say that's one of your favorite tropes to include in a mafia style romance where they have some type of either like arranged marriage or maybe, not a marriage where they're both loving each other before they step into it?
So, before it became a trope, I was already doing this in my previous books. So, I don't usually hinge on tropes. I hinge on the story. And if a popular trope fits, then yeah, it's a trope in there. But really, it's the story first for me. And then the tropes come about. Of course, I have to pay attention to the popular tropes. And I was happy that the my wife trope became so popular because I've been doing that. Mine was the original one, right? Mine trope, like he always says mine. So now with the my wife, because I have some books that they're married, and I always like that. And it became a thing before, well, it was a thing for me before it became a trope. So, so yeah, I don't think it's only associated with mafia. Maybe, I don't know, but I am mostly known ever since for my over-the-top jealous possessive heroes. So mine, my wife, my woman, that's a thing I love to write.
And I certainly love reading it. I know a lot of other people enjoy those tropes. On the topic of you being more a story before the trope, would you consider yourself then more of a plotter or a pantser?
I always say I'm a 60% plotter and 40% pantster. What I am is I'm very big on craft. Like, uh, I'm I call myself a craft whore because every time I see a craft book comes out or a class on writing, I take it because I always want my next book to be better than the last one. So that's why it takes me a long time to write a book. Like the Scorned Obsession, um, I've written the first draft March last year. So it takes me a while. I'd say, yeah, I think about the plot a lot. And then when I write it, characters don't always follow your outline. That's one thing I learned earlier in my career, that they'll throw out your outline and do what they want. That's when the pantster comes in.
So then when we put that in for this book, did you have any shocks with either of their stories as you developed more into what Scorned Obsession was going to be like as you wrote it?
Yes, actually, it was like, At first, I thought I was gonna have a difficult time because I've already locked myself into a corner when they met each other as children. I said I didn't realize how hard it was with the age gap because it can become icky, and I don't want it to be ever icky in their childhood until they became adults. So that's one of whenever I start a book, I always think immediately of what problems I will encounter in a book. And one of this is, what was the question again? So I don't lose track because I can
So the question was,
about anything that surprised me about
yeah,
this.
any shocks with either Bianca or Sandro that was like shocking or surprising as you dove into their story?
Yeah, actually, Sandro's backstory wasn't fully formed for me. And then I knew a bit of Bianca's already. But then what was so beautiful with how I discovered their story was at the end, how it came full circle. And I think that that came about because I sat on this story for a long time. You know, like it's like I call my method like bread make. It's like bread making. You let it sit and rise, you know, until it gets into or I let it marinate and then it or you know the compost, something like that. Compost heap, like your ideas, like they like you throw them together and then you let them marinate and then they'll become something really very useful. And that's what happened to this. So at the end of this story, when I got those full circles, even when I was writing the epilogue, I said, oh, this will be like a full circle thing. Like when when I wrote some scenes, oh, this was like the best epilogue for me is when I hit a mirror image of their beginning, like what they were in the beginning, and it's a mirror at the end. It's a mirror image for what they were in the beginning. So I call that my full circle. So, and I found so many of those with this couple because they have a long history. So yeah.
So their long history, actually, I had a few questions about.
Mhm.
So, are there any challenges for you as an author when there are couples like this who, you know, they weren't strangers, they had kind of been intertwined in some type of way from very young ages, and you got to kind of develop their story as they, you know, went through every phase in life and how it changed either from friends to, you know, they hated each other at one point. She still had a flame for him. He didn't realize he was developing it. But how do you manage that as an author? Because this interconnected past, even though these are standalones, you do see threads of it in the other books because you can't when it's a series where you have siblings.
Yeah. It's sometimes I paint myself into a corner, but with this one, I had to. So I do have what I call a series Bible. And I have all those, what we call like a chart of events that I have a timeline. I have an Airtable. I finally found a system, or it's like a database where I have their plot beats, the timelines and all that. So I keep track of them. So one of this with Bianca and Sandro, I knew it would be, I shouldn't introduce an inconsistency because of what happened previously, you know. So yeah, having hit, and I'm an author who hates flashbacks. So I knew their backstory was gonna be a problem. So that's one thing. When I said I like craft classes, actually at this time, I found a class that taught how to implement backstory without overwhelming the reader. So for me, I just developed some of my own methodology with what I want to read in a backstory. And there's going to be a lot of backstory here, but I found the most effective way to introduce a backstory where they know each other already is how to let it come naturally from how they interact with each other. You know how you remember something? That's how remember something from what happened with someone before. That's how I thought to integrate it naturally into this story. I had two major flashbacks in this book, but I picked the ones that are turning points for them because I don't want to overwhelm. So flashbacks and backstory aren't immediate to the book, and I don't like flashbacks, especially if they don't present. So I always make sure that it has a bearing to the present story. If it doesn't, I don't want to include it. It can be just a little snippet. So for their backstory and history, I had to pick and choose which ones are important to show and what can be told. I think you're familiar with the show and tell. There are two pivotal moments that I have to show, and there's some that I just have to tell, like maybe in their internal monologue or maybe in their conversation to show it through dialogue, how familiar they are with each other or something. So that's how I dealt with it.
So a little bit for me, I don't tend to like the childhood friends to lovers trope, mainly because I feel like in real life, there's very few instances where a couple who is best friends growing up never goes through anything that makes them hate each other at one point. Or it's just not as common as you want to believe it is in real life as you do see it in books.
Mm-hmm.
I do, however, like it when they are friends when they're younger, or they're more than acquaintances, but maybe not quite, best friends. Like in the case like this, where she was just always slightly younger, so they weren't quite what they would have been if they had been the same age.
Mm-hmm.
But then something happens that puts them on different paths,
Mm-hmm.
and they find their way back. I do really enjoy that one.
Mm-hmm.
And this one hit it on the head with that trope, mainly because, the event that pushes these two apart is a very big event. And I was very curious to see how you were gonna, push them back together and have them get a happily ever after. For those of us who have read the story, we know what separates them and kills Bianca's initial obsession. Or, she says it's killed.
Yeah.
It's killed as much as she will admit to herself.
Because the obsession is always there for a Delucci. She said, like, it's a myth in their family. So, but I think the event that killed it was huge, right? So, and I think that was important for me also, because otherwise there won't be any tension or any, conflict. I love sexual tension more than I do the actual explicit scene. So people think it's slow burn, but it's not really slow burn. I think they had chemistry. I made sure they have chemistry, and there's something that will keep, Yeah, and also I get what you mean. I think I don't like friends to lovers that much unless it's done well. That's why I inserted the enemies there, so there's more conflict. I write faster when I'm writing conflict rather than the sweet and no conflict part.
So this one is the third book. Fourth. And now I'm like, and I was going to list titles. How did I miss a book in there?
Which ones do you have?
So I had,
Air.
That's the one that I missed. I had Love and I had Vows. I didn't have Air.
Scorned Air is the very first book. It's Mateo's book. So that's the one that kicks off. Actually, that's the one that so all of these can be read as a standalone, but if you want to read in order. So so the reason I wrote Scorned Vows before Scorned Love, where it would have logically been Scorned Love after Scorned Air. But I went to Scorned Vows first because that hero, Luca, was very loud in my head. I mean, he wouldn't quit talking in my head, and I knew I cannot write Scorned Love if I don't give him his book first. So that's how my characters are. They're more a voice in my head than actually a physical manifestation, if you would. So yeah, Scorned Heir. And their parents have a book actually, like Bianca, like Cesar and Ava have a book, and that was written a long time ago. It's called 𝕨𝕠𝕤𝕗's Obsession. And the time period of that book was 1995, because I can't do a next gen. Like, that's also in modern time, so I deliberately set it in 1995.
So when you as an author sit down to write a story like this, where, I mean, I would even go to say, as far as to say, each 𝕨𝕠𝕤𝕗, I don't think I'm saying it right, 𝕨𝕠𝕤𝕗, they have a big presence in each book, the sibling that gets their story. How do you keep, because you mentioned you have your character Bible, but how do you keep the storylines intact as you go from like character to character among these standalone books?
I don't know how you do that. I still have my series Bible, as I call it, where so I work on plot beats. Are you familiar with Save the Cat? Like, we have plot beats. Like, we have the beginning, like they call it acts in certain craft books. They call it the first act, the second act. But I have what we call the beats, and I try to keep them. I have a calendar, it's like a timeline of events in each book that I map out. Please, Scorned Vows, the timeline there is very long. So, and then I have a separate notation where there are certain events that happen outside the book that is mentioned in the next book. For example, a character gets pregnant already, and I add that as a different event in my little timeline spreadsheet. It looks like a spreadsheet, but it's a database. So and that's my problem in the fifth book. That's upcoming, because all those events from Scorned Vows. You've read Scorned Vows, right? Have you?
So I am reading it.
Okay. So anyway, so it has a separate timeline. When I say a separate timeline, you'll find out when you read it. But all those timelines come to an end. And that was my problem. Oh no, this guy can't be like this. I have to stretch it because the timeline is so long. So I had to make sure that, it's without my little database where I can see, it's even like a Gantt chart, I think, or some timeline chart when I switch to a different view. So that's how I keep track of everything. But yeah, it's all here. Sometimes it's just in my head, and but because I'm so slow when I write, I take note of it. I just keep track of it.
So we've touched on this question I'm about to ask kind of throughout this interview, but a center stone for each story so far in this series has been the 𝕨𝕠𝕤𝕗 myth that, they're cursed to always be obsessed in some way with whoever they fall for, or someone pivotal in their life.
Mm-hmm.
How does that develop for you going from character to character? Because I did not read them in order. So I went from Scorned Obsession to Scorned Vows, and then I did Love, and I'm currently reading Love. But while they're all obsessed, they kind of follow different veins of obsession between each sibling. And I was curious, like, how you are going to continue to put a spin on it as we go through and get the last couple.
So the next couple, so we have a different one with Bianca, right? Because she's the girl, and they didn't think that women have this obsession, but she did also. So the next one is gonna be Dom, who is their cousin. It's not a brother, it's a cousin. But he's half Moretti, the hero of the second book, is the uncle. So the problem with Moretti is they're manipulative. So he's half 𝕨𝕠𝕤𝕗 and half Moretti, and his mother already said Moretti men always mess up. or fuck up. So a big thing in my books that readers love is groveling, and I intend to make this man, the next book, really grovel. So he's gonna mess up big. So that's how it's gonna be different. See, me, even if I say they're obsessed, I don't like it overt. The most fun I have when reading about an obsessed man is they don't know they're obsessed, but their actions prove it. It's not immediate. I don't like Insta. Even if it's not obvious, even if it's obvious to the reader, it's not obvious to him. That's my favorite part of writing. That's why it's all different flavors, because it hits them and they accept it differently. Like I think Mateo, the first one, it was still different how he reacted. And Nico, this scorned love, it was enemies to lovers. So he wasn't even admitting it. So those will be different, and Bianca is different. And I'm already through the first draft of the 5th book, and it's also very different.
So kind of on the same thread, kind of not. Don't hate me for asking this question, but I always love to ask it. Has there been a couple in this series that has just hit home for you as an author, where if someone was to say, like, what book should I read in this series, you would always say, this is the book that I would recommend?
Scorned Vows. It's actually my most popular book. So authors sometimes have imposter syndrome. They were not sure, especially in this social media age, wherein something you write you'll get canceled. You know what I mean? But with Scorned Vows, I know I want my hero to be an asshole, and I didn't have, and it's proven that, and this book proved it since it was my most popular. I didn't want to show it to any betas. I only had maybe one beta, the editor, and then my ideal reader. I have an ideal reader who has been with me from the beginning. She likes the same heroes I like. So, and Scorned Love had a sensitivity reader and another sensitivity reader because of the topics, fashion, and all the diversity in that book. And that's why I had sensitivity readers for it. But with Scorned Vows, I told myself, I want it to be as pure as possible. I don't want other people to influence how I want to write this book. So they hate it, they love it. It's fine. And guess what? It's my most popular hero. So that's why I'm listening to myself more. I think sometimes if you get too many opinions, it gets diluted. So yeah, I'll say Scorned Vows is, if you ask me what book from this series, I'll say Scorned Vows.
So I have a couple more questions about this series and some of the characters. And then I have a few closeout questions I always like to ask you guys that are more fun for us readers to kind of get a sense of who you are outside of writing the books we love to read. But this next question is, it might be a little hard to answer, but it's always a fun question for me to ask because I feel like I get insight into who you are as an author when I ask it. But so this is a mafia series. They're all kind of dark, but they're all dark in different ways. What's your favorite type of dark romance style writing to write as a writer?
So it's funny you ask, because I used to be just a romantic suspense writer. I used to write military romance. My backlist is special ops and all that. But I realized that the type of heroes I write, they're so alpha. They're not team players. They don't really do well in teams, right? So, and I'm just glad that mafia romance became popular, because I don't know if I could write a straight billionaire romance, because I love suspense. I love thrillers. So this, I don't think this is dark. I think it's just morally gray. We've had these discussions all the time. Authors have problems saying if their romance is dark and the readers say it's not, because I think readers have different opinions of what is dark. For me, dark is Pam Godwin. because it makes me uncomfortable. There's the first book in the Frozen Fate series was very uncomfortable for me to read, but I wanted to get to the next book, so I pushed through it and I loved it. And then it was funny, in another book group, it said that the first book in the Frozen Fate series makes the ritual child's play. So it's like, okay, so I really read a really dark book. So everything else, so what is the classification of dark? I don't know. Sometimes I think it's the relationship. If there's a lot of mental anguish of the heroine from the hero, I think that's considered dark. But if it's just external problems, like a lot of gunfights and all that, I don't think that's considered a dark romance.
It's funny that you bring up how different people consider dark differently, because I don't know if I would consider these dark either, but they are, light. They're not really light and fluffy either. So,
you know what? Somebody called it fluffy dark, but I just call mine morally gray romance. That's what I call it, really. I won't even call it dark romance. I don't know. It depends. Actually, Scorned Obsession is darker than the other three because of Sandra's backstory and also what happened. There are some, happened that are almost bordering on the dark also. So I would think A Scorned Obsession would be the darkest of the books if ever we're calling it dark. But Scorned Love is more contemporary. And the reason I did that, it's more lighthearted for me because I went through a lot of writing Scorned Vows was emotionally draining for me because the hero was such an asshole. But I just loved it because I made him grovel, and that was the reward of writing that book. Writing the book, they're the tropes that I like there that I've always wanted to write.
So coming off of that, so we've talked about which book in this series is your favorite, but when we flip to a non-𝕠𝕤𝕝 main character, which of the couple pairings has been kind of the most interesting? I don't want to say favorite. That's always the question I like to ask, is I like to know, which main characters were your favorite to write, but which one, just stuck with you after, crafting their story? That is a non-𝕠𝕤𝕝.
Non-𝕠𝕤𝕝, not this series, you mean? Or this series?
No, in this series, but just not one of the siblings. So, one of...
Well, Luca for sure. Luca has been in my head. So Luca is a secondary character in one of my books, my other series, my romantic suspense series. And the moment he entered the scene, I knew he was going to be a character that needed a book. So Luca of Scorned Vows, he's been in my head for a while because he was in my other series and he was so easy to write. Believe it or not, because I knew how he thought. It's scary how I knew how he would react, what he would say. It's his voice that I hear, so that's why it was easy for me to write. So yeah, Luca and Natalia is a couple that really stayed with me for a while. I could read their books over. When you're an author, you're gonna read your manuscript 100 times, and I never got tired. Well, actually, most of my books now, because I pack them so much in pacing, I don't get tired reading them over and over. So, but Luca and Natalia's, I really worked on that emotion too, because it is an emotional book, and I was happy when readers told me it was.
So this next question might be, again, a little bit more difficult to answer. But in this style writing, where you have the very possessive or obsessive alpha male type hero, they're normally paired with a heroine that isn't afraid to speak her mind. How do you balance having a fierce and strong heroine character and having that voice in the book, but not pushing it to over the line where people might be I just don't like how she refused to give up any of that independence?
Okay, this, especially with my next heroine too. Yeah, it is a balance because I cannot write what you call doormat heroines. I have a hard time. If I didn't have problem, if I didn't like not write, if I didn't like world building, I would have done better in romantasy, because they're usually the strong heroines and all that. Wherein the mafia romance seems to be more I think it's more the meek and I don't know, sweet heroine type. But I just can't. I just can't. When I start writing it, it's like I'm fake, you know. But with Natalia, there's still Scorned Vows has my most I was so meek. She wasn't meek. She had her own thing, but yeah, it just comes about as long as the hero comes about more alpha and she's not being independent stupidly. I don't know if that's a term. I mean, like we have a term we writers like to use called "too stupid to live." I don't know. I think it's a reader thing too. As long as it's not that way, we can let the other characters be stupid and get the main couples in trouble. But I don't want them to actually be the cause of it. And I think it's how we build the characters and backstory. Like the backstory, it doesn't have to be shown all the time, their backstory, but they need to be likable. There have to be a reason for that independence, and it's because I really like to write a very alpha hero that I need a heroine who's strong enough so it doesn't come about as bullying, like bullying and stepping over the heroine, like the heroine being a doormat. So I need her to speak her mind too, if you know what I mean. Because my heroes are really, I don't know, they're just over the top, obsessive, jealous alpha. And if the heroine is too submissive, then it'll just end up looking like they're bullying. So I needed them to, I think it balances it out actually without being, oh, this is my thing. She can be feisty, but not bitchy.
Mhm.
That's my thing. I don't like heroines who are bitchy and but she has to be intelligent in the way she speaks out her independence, but not just act out being immature, entitled. No, that's not how I want my heroines to be.
I agree. That's one of my favorite questions to ask in this style of romance is, that balancing line of making her have her own voice, but, not making her unlikable in the sense where you're just like, why did she have to go there? Like, can't you bend a little? And so it's always interesting, like how you do it as a writer and also how you pair these characters up, because I mean, it would take a strong person to want to live with Sandro in real life.
Oh yeah, really. Yeah, that's how I balance it. Like Bianca is actually sweet, but like I said in the book, you can trigger her crazy also and I think Bianca the way I looked at Bianca is I grew up with three older brothers. So I knew how it was. And I think that's why I'm kind of like outspoken also. The heroines in my book are outspoken because I had to survive. I was the youngest of three older brothers. And I think I mentioned it in the book. It's like they trained, although I was spoiled, they did train me in psychological and physical warfare because they would play tricks on me when I was a kid and I just had to fight back sometimes. And that's how I kind of channeled Bianca also. Like she can be sweet, she's spoiled, but brothers will be brothers, right? But they trained her for to handle a man like Sandro. That's how I balanced it too, because my brothers will tell me if I'm being bitchy, you know. Yeah,
Leave
so
it to the siblings to give you that dose of
how I
truth.
learned how to balance it. Yeah, I don't want bitchy. I don't want like a heroine shouldn't be like that.
So outside of Bianca, did any other characters kind of get influence or inspiration from your personal life as a whole?
So most of the characters, even the men, and this is always what it is, it's always a part of you. Like all my characters are a part of me, a part of someone I know or multiple someones I know, and a part imagined. So there's three. So it's important to be that way so it becomes multidimensional instead of just being, all me. And I think you can, from what I see, my characters, they're also different from each other. Even the men, they're also different from each other because they're all part of different people that I cobbled together.
So you've mentioned the next book will be a half 𝕸𝕤𝕦. How many more books past book 5 can we expect in this Scorn
The
series?
next book will be the last one, but there'll be a spin-off series. So it won't be the last of the 𝕸𝕤𝕦s, but it will still be Mafia and Billionaire.
So I know at the beginning you said you don't do the second gen, but would you ever do a second gen for these kind of almost, I mean, I don't want to call this the second generation because you have the parents book, but would you ever do a series with the kids of the Scorn series going forward with any spinoffs?
No, I don't think so. Because I don't want to think. So I started with their parents, right? And then if I'm gonna do their kids, then what will happen to the parents? Because I don't want them to be so old and, in their 80s or something already. So no, I don't think I'm gonna do second gen because I don't like the idea of their parents getting old.
So we'll pivot a bit as we start to close out, but you've mentioned that you tend to like more of the suspense mystery. When you read for fun in your free time, is that kind of what you enjoy reading as well? Or do you go on the opposite direction and kind of read completely what is different from what you write?
Actually, I don't read a lot of mafia. I do read real life mafia, like biographies of these mafiosi. But I like thrillers and I like angsty. I like anything that's angsty. Anything that's angsty, I'll read it. So it doesn't necessarily have to have suspense, but as long as it makes me feel, then I'll read it. But I think the reason I don't read a lot of mafia by itself was because it's not as suspenseful as I want it to be, or as angsty as I want it to be. Because I think most of the mafia, it's like he's obsessed, and then touch her and die and all that. But I like my guys to mess up. And I like a long grovel. So I tend to go to those angsty romances. Actually, it's funny because I binged on Abby Jimenez last year. And I didn't know that I also like Green Flag Heroes. So it really depends. It just has to be well written and catch my attention. And I don't really like very long books. And I think because I'm writing and I don't have a lot of time, I want, if I'm going to read it, I'll finish it in 2 days. So, yeah. So I read all over the place. I read every genre. I don't like romantasy that much, but I love Fourth Wing, and yeah. And suspense thrillers, that's what I read. I binge a lot of TV, like Netflix. I stream a lot of movies too.
So have you actually read Onyx Storm?
No.
Yeah, me neither.
It's 700 pages. I feel like I need to prepare for it. And then, but, I'll eventually get to it. But now I'm thinking, since everybody's crying about the ending, should I just wait for the 5th book? Because I don't really I like to read everything all at once. Because I have very little, I don't like cliffhangers. But, I don't know. I'll give in eventually, I think.
I know how it ends. I haven't finished it, but I do know how it ends. It is a cliffhanger, but I don't think it's as bad as what we ended book 2 on.
Really? Okay.
In my head, no, because in my head, I know how it ends and I see where it might go from there. And I'm like, I didn't take it as bad. Now, everyone I know in my friend group was like, oh my God, I should have waited like you. And I was like, but I don't see how it ended terrible. I see it as a good setup for the last two books.
Okay, yeah. And also, okay, I don't like too much world building, and I think people were complaining about how the first 8 chapters, they didn't know where they were, but I found a cheat sheet. So, so I think, see, I'm that way. I don't mind spoilers at all, you know, but I don't want to get lost in the book, especially if it's romantasy like this. But otherwise, I won't enjoy it. But yeah, I might eventually read it.
So, on the topic of, books and stuff you like to read, was there ever an author or a book or something that got you into writing and kind of got you into that? This is what I want to do with my career.
It's funny how it started. I was not really an author. I think Lisa Kleypas, which is a historical romance writer, actually. And there's Kresley Cole is my favorite. I love the way she writes banter. So it's funny because and then there's Kristen Ashley, which got me into contemporary romance, and everybody's read 50 Shades. But a lot of people have read 50 Shades. So that's how it started. Was I was just playing around because I thought, all these heroines always give in to the hero when they mess up so bad. I don't like, that's what started this was I wanted to write strong heroines because I wasn't getting them in what I was reading and I was getting frustrated. When I wrote the book, I wasn't even planning on, it was just a one-off. Fire and Ice was my very first book, and that's the one that always goes viral on TikTok. So that's why um I sent the first 5 chapters to my friend. So, I started writing and then I left it. I didn't continue it. And then when she came back, I said, where's the rest? Oh, you think it's good enough? Okay. So I wrote the rest and then had it edited and I published it. I wasn't even thinking much about, I wasn't even thinking somebody's going to read. This was way back in 2013. Writing for me was just for fun. It wasn't about, it was really for fun for a long time. And then finally said, okay, I think I can make a living out of this. So, and that's how, and still, I don't watch that often because I know the style of books I want to write takes a while to write.
Victoria does actually have a copy of the book with her. If you want to go ahead and show everyone what the cover looks like, because my next question is about the cover. So this is Scorned Obsession.
Mm-hmm.
And I was curious. So each book in this series has they have very distinct parts in the cover. When you designed the cover, how did you pick what was going to be shown for each couple's book?
So roses seem to be like very common in romance. Roses imply romance immediately. And then I also like peonies, which was the second book. But so there would be a flower, but I really want, if you notice, both of this one is inverted. Why is it inverted? Like the very first book, you see New York skyline inverted. And it's because it's the underworld. And that's why I had New York inverted. And then it just became a thing and I liked it. Sometimes they'll have like jewelry on it, like this Scorned Obsession has this ginormous ring, and if you read the book, you will know why. And then Scorned Vows has the wedding rings, but the others didn't have anything else because I couldn't find anything that would go with it. So, and it's like gritty and it's white. If you notice, if you see mafia romances, mine stand out because most of them are dark. But like I said, I don't really consider it dark, but it's gritty. Mine is more gritty than dark, I think, because of a lot of murder and mayhem. And that's why I had it grunged out because it's white, to show it's morally gray and gritty, but it's not really dark like a lot of the mafia is.
So, and I just
And the
blinked.
sunflowers, if you will read the book, you know what it means. And this was the one where the sunflower really played a big part of the book, I think. The meaning of it.
So, I just blanked on my question. Give me
Sorry.
give me a minute. I was thinking of it, and it will come back to me. Maybe. Because my next question was going to be what I ended on, but now
I talk too much.
No, it's been a question that has been like, I think of it, and then as I sit down it always goes out, like, it goes out.
You should write it down.
I should. It wasn't on one of my questions I wrote down. That's what keeps getting me. Hopefully it'll come back. But so we've talked about what's next with the final book in this series. Can you give us any hints of what we can expect coming off of the Scorn series and going into what you might be thinking about?
Well, coming off the Scorn series or the last book in the series?
Coming up, so after your next after Dom's book.
Okay, it's still gonna be mafia, but it's gonna be the Russians are gonna come in. Yes, the brat. It's gonna be about alliances, marriages, and all that. And the reason I did that is because I found out that my wife, like you said, I have fun writing that, and I could do a lot of things over it because, okay, I forgot to mention when you asked me what books I like to read. And I like to binge on Harlequin Presents. Have you read Harlequin romances? They're these little imprints. They're just billionaire. They're very
familiar. I tend to
formulaic that even I can't remember titles because they're all billionaires, baby, chic's wife, and stuff like that. But I like reading those because they're just the very alpha heroes, very dense heroes sometimes that I love that they just mess up. And then the growing in that is not so good, but it has a formula and it's just easy to read and it's very quick. I love reading those because it has the type of heroes I like to read. They're very politically incorrect, especially since I like the old ones that were written in 2000, So it's just that. It doesn't have a lot of... It's just politically incorrect sometimes that, it's more... I forgot the term for it. But, it's just good reading. The very old books. I love reading old books.
I've heard of them. I tend to read bigger books.
Like longer ones?
Yeah, like I tend to not read anything under 200 pages.
Oh, these are like 180 pages. Yeah. So
I read really fast, so I don't mind it being a little bit longer because then I don't have to end the book when it's shorter. I get a little bit more.
Yeah. I don't like very long books. Like if they're like over 500 pages, it gives me pause. Am I gonna read this or not? Because for me, why will it be 500 pages if it's contemporary, for example? If it's suspense, if it has a big external plot running through it, then okay. If it's romantasy, then yeah, it's fine. But 500 pages and it's a rom-com or a contemporary, it gives me pause.
So my last question will be a great one to end on since we've touched on what you might be doing in the future after this series.
Mm-hmm.
But as a mafia author, which branch of the different mafias is one that has piqued your curiosity? And it can be one you've written, one you have planned to write or hope to write one day. That you would be excited to dive into. So you have like the Italians, the Irish, the Russian mafia. So like branch like that, like the different subsects of.
So I really like the Italians because of the family and the the food, and they're just very expressive. But I like also the Russians. And I'm going to explore that more and research it because they're more, I think, secretive, and more, well, not like the mafia. I mean, the Italians are also secret, but they're more like warm, I think, But the Russians, their beginnings were in the gulags, like, prisoners and all that. And they have harsher beginnings. So I expect they'll be colder, and it'll be nice to make. I just like the idea of the Russian, the bratva being the next one I'm gonna explore. Actually, I was gonna touch on the Irish also, but it's not such a big thing, I think, right now, the Irish mafia in the US. But it's fiction. I can make anything up because I actually explored it, the Irish mafia, because they're mostly in Boston, so I can touch it because if you look at the DeLucci's, they're half Irish. The grandfather of the DeLucci's was actually an enforcer for the Italian mafia, and that was how the Italian mafia and the Irish worked together before, back in the 70s and the 60s and all that. The Irish usually were their enforcers.
So we are going to end it there and give you guys a little tease of what she has to come. But like we've said, Scorned Obsession is a great romance for you to read if you're tuning in and you haven't read a Victoria ever. But it's also book 4, and you can pick up anywhere in this series and read it. Starting from the beginning might help with events and timelines and character buildup. But each one stands alone. I read out of order. I tend to be anal retentive on having to start with book 1 even when an author says standalone. So you can trust me when I say that you can read each book and it doesn't not make sense.
Oh, that's good. That's good to hear. I try very hard to make it stand alone too.
But thank you, Victoria, for tuning in with me today. I enjoyed chatting with you.
I enjoyed this. I enjoyed to you.
Finding a new mafia romance author to read.
Thank you. Thank you so much.